Hey, I'm Nick,
And I'm Graeme.
and this is the Dude, Where's My Code podcast. This is episode number 12. Graeme, you and I were just chatting about retros, but from a slightly different perspective, a retrospective. I was kind of looking at it from the sprint side of things, and you.
Yeah, we were doing like a bigger project retro. Pretty neat that we both had done this in the past week and both maybe felt like we hadn't done our best and we were able to kind of retro our retros together. That's pretty
Yes.
cool.
Yeah, so Graeme and I both left with some takeaways that we're going to try to improve upon, so we think you're going to enjoy the episode. Please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment below for the algorithm, and subscribe to see more, and enjoy. My idea of like I'm gonna go into a team and not just like totally disrupt it, because I think that's just the wrong approach. I'm finding now more than ever that I'm like, okay, but I've waited X amount of time, and like I feel that I want to actually try to drive some change in some direction, and I'm feeling like, okay, but if I do anything, is it too much? Like, so I think the way that I look at this is I've been relying too heavily on waiting for people on the team to come up with the proposal, because it's happened and there's been some good stuff and it's great.
Yep.
But I think I've been waiting too much on that when I should have been more proactive. But I'm so fearful of being like, hey, what if we try X? And people are like, oh, there he is trying to mess everything up. Like, I don't I don't want to be that person.
It's so funny you say that. That was one of my lessons that I learned when I started at Circle CI. I was building the insights team, and every time, like, we were hiring really fast. So when I say every time someone joined, we're talking every like 2 weeks ish, not like big
Wow.
periods of time in between. And I was trying to build this team, and I was like, okay, when people join, they will bring their perspectives and their experience, and we'll kind of assemble our team's values and our way of working and the processes we're going to follow and kind of the code layout we're going to use. We'll assemble that as kind of a culmination of all the things that people bring, you know? And then like that went really poorly. And it turned out that I actually needed to be like, listen, here's where we're going to start. And then
Yeah.
we will iterate on and I will take your input on. But to say like, I'm not going to propose a starting place, we're going to build this together, like meant that we were slower to get started than we could have been if I had just said, this is where we're starting. And it is not the end point. And it is not
Yeah.
Graeme says what the best thing is. It's just Graeme has chosen how we start and now we will figure it out together.
And you make sure people are empowered to drive and influence that stuff. So your example is interesting, I think, because I'm trying to put myself into a similar situation, and I'm wondering if it was more of like a green field, however you want to describe it, where it's like you're kind of starting it from scratch. If I would have been, and I don't know, if I would have been more comfortable being like, okay, like I'm just going to propose something to start with, versus in my situation, I was like, there's already people working there, and I don't want to step on toes, but I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's fair to not want to show up and like drop a bomb and like
Yeah,
mess people's shit up, right? Like hey,
you were happy working. Now you're not. Like, not my
right.
fault.
I think I've said this before, maybe even when we've been recording, but like that is what I kind of accidentally did in the early days of joining Magnet
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
because of the false expectations that I had kind of been given. So like I get that. And it's kind of interesting. I've recommended to many people the book. It's called The First 90 Days, right? And it's about,
You've mentioned this
I think
before,
I've
and I
mentioned
think
it,
I don't read, so it's like I'm like
right?
I should write it down, but then I'm gonna not read it. So
Let me verbalize it.
okay.
First 30 days, learn the context and what's going on there. The next 30 days, start developing a plan and kind of like grassrooting it. So like finding allies for your plan and kind of starting to plant the seeds. And then the
Mhm.
final 30 days, implement the change so that by the end of 90 days, you have imparted change upon the team. But it wasn't like, hi, I'm here and we're doing this thing.
It's like
So
enough of a time window and an opportunity in the middle there to get that allyship of like you're helping shape it as we go forward.
yeah. And I mean, that's the book's suggestion. Definitely different scenarios call for different timelines. But roughly speaking, that's what was kind of pitched by that author. Where I am now, I had kind of a 30-day window to learn and assess. And then kind of the expectation is in the next month, I will have developed a plan and started taking action against it. So it's a slightly condensed time frame.
Well, it
But
can't work then because it needs to be exactly 90 days.
on the 90th day.
No, that's cool. That's an interesting approach. Yeah, I know you've recommended it before, so that's cool.
So does that mean like things like adding retros to the team in your
Mm,
case haven't happened until now, like because you've been avoiding adding something like a retro to the
yes,
process?
100%. So for a little bit of background, like it's been, I don't know exactly. It's not it's not 3 years. It'll be 3 years in like August, I guess, right? So two and a half, if I can do some kind of math.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I am like extremely against coming into a team and being like, I'm here to change things because I just think that that's wrong. It just feels totally wrong. I've been on the other side of it. We've talked about this a million times.
I mean, it's misguided to assume that what worked for you before worked for you here too, right? So, like, hey, we're gonna do what I've done before is like a pretty terrible position to come from.
Right. And then I think the problem, sorry if there's dogs barking, it's they're very excited. But the problem that I have is like leaning on that too hard and then probably not taking more like any kind of action because I'm so worried about the negative effect of like just trying to do too much or interfere. So um, we've I should clarify too. We don't have like any issue on our team where it's like we have a problem and I have to improve people's effectiveness and like it's literally not the case. I work with great people. Um, People are smart. People get their work done. Are there opportunities where we could collaborate more? Of course. Are there opportunities where more junior folks could be, getting answers quicker? Of course. But it's not like we have a fundamental problem that needs to be fixed. So it makes it even more challenging where I'm like, I want to look to get improvements, but I'm not like, hey, look, we have this like extremely obvious problem. If I just suggested we go do X, people would be like, yeah, that makes sense because we have this huge problem that needs to be addressed. So,
Right. Well, isn't that kind of the point of using team metrics to decide which ones you want to make better and then convince that there is some experiments you can run to see how they impact the metrics?
yeah, and so that's a good point. Right now, like when it comes to at least developer metrics, like engineers on the team, we don't have metrics. We've only our work has been like effectively a rolling backlog. And
Right.
when we look at our OKRs, this is part of the like I feel like OKRs are a great tool, and we didn't have anything on the other side that was closer to the engineering, like directly at the engineering level. So what would happen is we'd have these KRs we're measuring, and we're like, hey, it's off track or it's on track, great. But if it's off track, like let's focus a little more on it, drive the number, and it's been working. So cool. But what I feel like is missing in the whole process, and this is kind of just like a philosophical thing from my perspective for what I consider effective teams, like you need a feedback loop from the team. And I feel like if you don't have a defined feedback loop, you don't have a good opportunity for a team to work together to improve itself and then dynamically adjust as the business changes, as team members change, like anything. You just end up being in this position where I would suspect, unless you get lucky, the team kind of like starts to get worse over time because you're not consciously trying to address the things that need attention.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a gap that the retros I think are something that could improve.
So you did one.
So we did one, yes. So yeah. Sorry, the bit of a tangent slash rant there, but yeah. So we had done one, and I would say like I guess starting at the end of last year, we were trying to organize into a little bit more structured around sprints. I would say that because of our the space that we're working in, things move a little bit slower just in terms of like literally being able to validate things. So we do month long sprints. It's longer than I'm used to in general. Like the 2 week thing feels stellar for me, but a month right now feels like, based on the rate that we can observe changes and react,
Mhm.
that feels okay. So been doing that for a bit, but this is the first time we did a retro at the end. And I guess my perspective on the retro is that, I'm going to have a disclaimer here. I don't think it went well, but I don't think that it was like anyone's sort of responsibility for the outcome except my own. I feel like I did not do a good job of running that retro. So like full responsibility for kind of having that feeling about it is because of me, not because anyone on the team or anything like that. So
It didn't go off
um
the rails and devolve into fist fighting and
no, not at all. And actually, given that we had people on the team that had never participated in that kind of thing before, we had people participating. So like that was good. Like I would expect, actually, if people have never done it, you'd be like, "Hey, like let's talk about thing X," and people would just be quiet, and you're like what
yeah,
the heck?
one of the
Um,
hardest parts of facilitation.
yeah.
When the
And
group's
then I'm
quiet.
sitting there like, I might have some thoughts, but I'm like, I need to shut up because that's not not my role here.
Yeah.
So it was challenging because I think, well, first of all, probably one of the biggest call outs is that this is my first fully remote retro. So I don't want to just sit here and be like, oh, well, remote work makes this impossible and that's why it didn't feel so great. But I think there's a factor there where, in terms of even like the scheduling, the organization of stuff, like when we've worked together, when we go do a retro, it's like stickies on a whiteboard, put them up there. You got similar ones, stack them, vote them, plus one them.
You know what? There's so many tools out there that try to address like making retros easier. We used an app called Retro that's designed to do retros. Uh,
Retro. How do you spell that?
Reetro, Retro, retro with an extra e.
Yeah.
And there's kinds of other ones that are just more like less retro focused and more just like stickies. And then there's kind of jam boards, right? There's all these things, and I don't care. They've been getting better. I will stand by the fact that nothing so far has been able to replace putting stickies on a whiteboard. And you can like write on the whiteboard and you can erase and you can write on stickies and you can move them and you can tear them in half and you can dot vote them and plus one them and you can group them. And it's like, there hasn't, I haven't embraced a tool yet either. And we've tried many. Um, so I totally feel that deeply. Like there's just something to be said for here's a sticky pad and here's a marker and there's the whiteboard and we're going to sit in this room and we're going to do this thing together. Um,
Yeah. So that was part of it. And so this isn't like a Microsoft plug to be like, hey, go buy the Microsoft products, because uh, people have to pick tools that work best for them. So I have not used Azure DevOps to go do a retro before.
mhm,
I was actually pretty impressed and I haven't used tools to do this because it's always been in person. I was
right.
pretty impressed that it let me customize it enough where I was like, hey, I can at least have like groupings of things that we would,
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think, like to talk about. But here's an example where I had to be like, I'm gonna pick the groupings. So
right.
there's like the like, wish, wonder, there's the start, stop, continue. I'm like, if we've never done a retro and I have to go survey the team to go say which one do we think is best, and people haven't even done them before, it's like it's
Yeah,
it's
no. I mean,
it's not gonna
and
be good.
most of them are just meant to spark thinking and reflection, right? They all kind of orient around the same themes, more or
Sure.
less. Um, although
Yeah.
I do, was it? I don't know if it was with you or after working with you, but like I think we found that the like wish wonder, the wonders kind of devolved into like passive aggressive like statements. Like I wonder if people didn't suck so bad, like if we'd be better. And you're
Was
like,
that just our team? Like the
yeah, I don't know, but like I definitely have in years past looked for retro formats that force people to think about actions as opposed
yeah.
to posit questions without really having to propose an answer to it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's funny you mentioned the passive aggressive part because I feel like I don't know. I guess it depends on people's personalities and stuff too, but it's like it's almost, depending on your personality, it could almost seem like a shortcut to being like, I'd like to propose a change, but I don't know the solution to propose, so I'm just gonna basically say like, I'm gonna make a statement about something sucking and frame it in a way that's like, I wonder, like, it's no, like, go the full route and say, like, I think I have a solution I would like to propose. Like, that's
Yeah.
not being an
Not.
ass.
I wonder if we would be more successful if Nick would actually work.
Yeah, like if you don't think I'm working, come up with a proposal for what you would like to see, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, so I went with a start, stop, continue, and then a kudos because I actually whether or not people think that's important in a retro, I'm like, I want a forum for people to be able to be like, hey, that thing you did was, I'm not going to swear on a recording, but was effing awesome. There we go. So
Mhm.
good balance. So I want people to be able to share that kind of feedback with their peers so that we have some mechanism to be like, look, that, you might have done something small to help a colleague out, but you might have like no idea how beneficial that was to them. And this is a great opportunity for people to be like, look, like might have taken you 10 minutes, might have taken you half an hour on a call with me, but like that changed my entire week. Like, thank you so much. I
Right.
think that stuff's really important.
Yeah.
So the thing that was kind of rough in the beginning, and this again is my fault, was I picked start, stop, continue, and people were like, well, what do we put in there? And I was like, shit, like I now I need, let me think through some examples, and I have to contrive some examples to be like, um let me see if I can I want to tell people like there's no wrong spot. Like I don't want you to basically see this tool and be like, I can't put my thoughts onto here because I don't know how to assign them properly. So I can't, I'm drawing a blank because we're having a conversation and recording it, but I picked an example where I could literally move it across all three. I'm trying to think. It was something about like doing pull requests where it was like, we should start doing like sharing our pull requests in the chat when they're ready to review. We should continue doing that if people feel that we're already doing that, or we should stop like just waiting for people to come across our pull requests instead of posting them. So I tried to use an
Right.
example like that and just said like, look, if you put it up there and we're like, hey, we could maybe group it with something else, cool. Like, just please put your ideas up there. So I feel like that was a bit of a barrier for people. And again, I'm not I'm not sitting here like blaming my team for that. I have to look to myself to be like, look, like it it's my job to be able to reduce the barriers enough where people feel comfortable to participate effectively. So that was one of the first kind of barriers, but I do think even given that, people did a pretty good job of getting thoughts put into this system. So that was a positive.
They've also, I don't know about you, but for me, like they've kind of become so ingrained and common now that like I struggle to think back about what it took to learn how to participate in retros. Like it's so far back. I'm like, what was the first retro I was in like? Like what did it feel like? And how did I know how to do contribute positively to it?
Right.
So it's like it's difficult. I don't think I've really had to do retros for people who hadn't done them before, but it is difficult to think about like how would I approach doing a retro today and try and empathize and plan for people having never experienced something like that at all. Um, yeah.
I think a really interesting part of that, as you were saying it, I'm kind of trying to put myself through the process, being like, imagine this is my first programming job and my first retro I'm going to, and I'm just trying to think about the different teams that you might find yourself in. And when I reflect on some experiences, like retros can get heated. And in my opinion, I think this is my opinion, so if you disagree, that's okay. But in my opinion, like a good retro should have a heated conversation in it. And when I say that, I don't mean that you should be like throwing fists at each other, but I think that if you have a good level of trust in a team, I'm not saying you need to force the heated conversation. What I'm trying to say is that when people should feel free to disagree and be like, look, I want to share my perspective, and someone else to be like, no, like I disagree with that, and here's my perspective. And when you have such a high level of trust within a team, that heated feeling is like it's really cool because you're like I actually respect that person a lot and they totally disagree with me. So colleague that Graham, you and I used to work with, I'm gonna say his name is Cam. Like Cam, I think is a genius programmer. Cam and I would generally come up with functionally similar solutions to things. We'd be like, these are the things we value. So if we were to design something, here's the outcome we'd want to achieve. And if you put us in different rooms, we got to do solutions, brought us together, it would achieve the same thing, but he would do it in a completely different way for me.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to like review things with him and disagree with him was always like such a powerful thing for me to be like, wow, like it's just a different perspective and it feels good when you have trust. It feels the exact opposite when you're in a situation where you're like, I don't feel respected. I don't feel like I have trust in this group, and I feel like I need to voice a concern or something that's uncomfortable because what's going to happen?
What is going to happen?
That's it. But yeah, I think like for people that have never done them before, that's probably something like people will just shut up. They're like, nope, like that's uncomfortable. No thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Just avoid it. Anyway, I rambled there for a bit. What are your thoughts on heated conversations and retros?
Yeah, I think like that's I think we're aligned like in that they're a sign of safety and trust. Or they could be a sign of total dysfunction, I guess. So it could go either way, but maybe it depends on like what the outcome is as well, right? So,
Sure, that's a good
like,
point.
are you able to drive that to an action, or does someone get a new perspective and actually come to an understanding they didn't have before out of it? Seems like a
Valid
useful
point. Yeah,
tool. Two people leaving the room like pissed off and not wanting to work with each other again. Maybe the wrong kind.
yeah.
Um,
That's probably a detail that when I'm reflecting, I'm like, I've completely omitted that part because historically, when I've had situations where I'm like, the heated conversation feels good after, it's because we were like, oh, like so good to hear your perspective after. Now we've kind of come up with a plan, or sometimes it means taking, your side or the other person's side because someone was like, I didn't even know about that detail.
mhm.
Knowing that, it makes sense to choose path X, like hands down, like that was totally left out. So anyway, yeah, the result of that I think is an important part.
Yeah. Um, I mean, this has come up a few times this week, actually, with multiple conversations I've been in. But generally speaking, like healthy tension is useful for growth and useful for um, achieving shared understandings and alignment, right? Like this is the classic like engineering manager, product manager relationship is one of healthy tension. They have like competing
Right.
priorities, um, and yeah. So I mean, I can see the same thing in a retro too, like where if everyone agrees all the time, um, I would question the diversity of thought of the group and the team that I've
Yeah.
assembled, and like, and I would also say it almost would indicate to me a sign of like um words escape me. I was gonna say lethargy, but I don't think that's the right one. Apathy, I think maybe. Like, hey, we're in this state, and things are
Com-
like fine.
complacency
Like,
comes to mind.
complacency,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
Everyone's like, we're fine. I'm like, cool. And all it takes is one person to be like, I don't think we're fine. I think, right? Like, and then like, great. Now we can discuss it and debate it and
Yeah.
kind of probably grow from it.
Well, it sounds funny to say too, because I mean, I don't know, depending on who's listening or watching, to be like, hey, our team is doing fine. Like, you might be like, well, isn't that good then? Like, isn't it good to be in a position of fine? And I think the answer is yes, but like when you get into some, like, when you start to feel complacent, I think that's where it's dangerous. So, again, my perspective, like forcing teams to be like, under pressure, like trying to like, do more with less, like all the time. Like that's not what I'm suggesting. But
Mhm.
um, the I think the inverse, when you get complacent, the reality is that businesses change, team dynamics change, product changes, all this stuff is changing. And if your team is totally complacent, you do not adapt. And that's where suddenly it feels okay, like sneaks under the radar for long enough until it's like, oh shit, like we are not okay. Then it's an issue.
Mhm. One modification, maybe like instead of heated debate, I think like passionate is
Yeah.
the right place to be. Like you mean that, like,
Yeah.
but
It's a
heated
good
because people
clarification.
care, and not heated because they are angry. I think is maybe the
I think that's a very good clarification. Yeah, so thank you. It's not the heated part is just literally because when you're in the conversation, you can feel the room warming up, not because you're like, I want to choke the person I'm talking to. Like that's not the case. It's a thing of passion about the thing you're talking about.
yeah, animated or whatever you want to energized conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point.
We were talking about being careful with words earlier, so
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Yeah, because it was literally before we started recording, we were off on a little tangent about like not using phrases and stuff that were too aggressive, and here I am.
no, I mean it's as a total aside, it's become so common, and it's generally accepted that we understand what it means until it's used in a situation where that particular phrase is triggering for an individual, or they haven't ever had that context before, or like you said, not everyone is necessarily native English speaking on the team
Mhm.
anymore, and they don't necessarily understand the turn of phrase or whatever. And if you take some of them literally, they don't sound that great.
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating. It seems like such a small thing, but the implications that could have. So anyway, that was an aside, but I think it was still like very interesting to you start having teams at different scales and different backgrounds. It's like these things are need to be considered. So
Well, I mean, for us, that conversation came out of talking about what you call a project retrospective, right? And me kind of getting on the soapbox and railing against the term postmortem, but
yeah,
same thing.
yeah, exactly. Because it's like in given how a project goes, like literally, unless it didn't get out the door or like literally died somehow, then it's not really a post-mortem. It's like that's what the phrase like is reflecting on a project. And I mean sometimes people will call a post-mortem even for a project that was successful. They're
Right.
just doing the reflection on it, but it's not really what the root of the word is meaning. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, the implications. It's one of those things. It's like almost everyone just kind of gets it, and it's generally accepted, but doesn't mean that we have to use that term.
Yeah, and why lead into something like that if you're reviewing a project, regardless of how it went? Like, why start the thought process around like literally framing it like this thing is dead and what happened to kill it? Like,
Time to poke it with a stick and
like we can probably do better. And to be honest, it's not a difficult change. So like, why not try?
yeah, I mean, I've been defaulting lately to Project Retro, but I do recognize that that causes confusion with people who are used to using the term retro for like a sprint retro and like a look back on very agile specific things. And I'm like,
Right.
retro just means retrospective. And so the modifier for me, like project retrospective, is like we're looking back on the project. Um, but again,
Well,
like
that's kind of what happened when we started talking, right? Because I had mentioned that I was kind of looking at sprint retros, and you had mentioned that something recent for you was like a project retro, not a post mortem. Which I was like, oh, you mean a post mortem, right? And that's how we
and then we
went on
had an
that. Yeah,
angry, heated debate about it.
yeah, yeah. Heated. Yeah,
Um,
I see what you did there. You just killed two birds with one stone.
oh no,
No, you fed two birds with one scone.
scone. Yeah.
Just lost all our subscribers. Okay.
Yeah, and right about now, is that the drop off? Um, yeah, yeah. I would say like it's funny we were talking about this because I too recently had a retro. I too didn't love how it went because of my own influence or control or inability to do it the way I get to the outcome I would like out of the retro. Um, for me, I'm pretty confident running like sprint retrospectives, especially for teams that are used to doing them, or like that's a pretty standard thing for me. I think I'm also relatively comfortable running like incident retrospectives, or what most
Okay.
organizations call like incident postmortems, which I didn't rail against as hard because like incidents are generally not good things and we kind of want them to die. But anyway, whatever. Incident retros. And I'm pretty comfortable with those because, again, a specific thing happened uh, and we want to root cause it. And I'm much more comfortable in that space because as a software tester, root causing things is what got me into software in the first place. With retroing projects, you're kind of looking back on it and you're saying, okay, what did we believe was the outcome we wanted? When did we want to achieve that by? And then like let's talk about whether we did or not and what went well and what didn't go well about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that for me that requires a lot higher degree of skills specifically in facilitation, conversation facilitation, and discussion facilitation. And that's not my strength area. So if there's somewhere I want to work on to improve retros, it's that. So for me, it's actually not the format of the meeting. It's not the intention of the meeting. It's just the like in the meat of a retrospective when you want to be kind of like getting to the core of the what happened and the why and the what are we going to do about it, and really try and drive that to actions. And if you're doing this well, like concrete assignable actions, which I find extremely difficult when you're having big broad conversations. For me, that's the difficult sticking point. And so that's I think why I would say my most recent retro maybe fell down is I failed to facilitate the conversation in a way that helped us really get at the core areas for improvement and what we would do to improve those. So people, the feedback I was given was like, there was definitely value in what we did. A bunch of perspectives were revealed that we weren't necessarily all clear on. So it actually helped
Okay.
get to alignment in reflection, which, is in some ways too late, but that's okay. We'll use that for next time, hopefully. But there was a lot of feedback. Like I would have liked to get more into some of the specifics about the failure points of the project and how we will avoid that in future. So
Right.
fair enough, right? And yeah,
It's like the organization, the moderation, and I think you made a really good point just about the conversational skills that go along with that. Um, I suspect if you could sit back in your meeting that you were in and be a participant, again, without knowing the details, but even if you had enough information, you could probably be sitting there analyzing, being like, hey, like I actually think maybe this didn't go well, like let me put my hand up and say something. But that's not your role.
it's funny you say that. It's really funny you say that because like I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, if I was a participant, I think I could engage in this. I think I could share thoughts that might spark discussion and reflection
Right.
and probably even drive something. But as a facilitator, I'm like, shut the hell up and just don't share perspective, but try and get others to, right? And I mean, I even employed a technique that I had been taught and it didn't work that well for me, which is like on a piece of paper off the side, write the name of all the participants down. And then like every time someone talks, like check their name off. And if it looks like it's starting to look really imbalanced, like call on the people who are out of balance. Totally failed at that too.
Wow. Okay.
But I get into this, like, it's so funny. Like I over the years, as I have grown in age, matured in life and in my career, I seem to have like been developing an increased level of anxiety in groups. So I used to be like, I don't care what people think of me, I'm good at whatever, and I'll just talk and whatever. And now as I'm older and more professionally mature, I'm like constantly overthinking my participation in and role in like conversations in groups. And so in facilitation, it's this like ongoing battle of, okay, I got to engage someone. Ooh, but I don't want to call people out if they don't really want to be called upon. I don't want to make someone be uncomfortable inadvertently. Okay, well, I better step in and say something, but I don't want to share an opinion because that's not my job as a facilitator. And I think maybe what that looks like on the outside is Graeme just staring blankly at the screen for 30
Yeah.
seconds while I have this internal fight.
Yeah, there's a lot going on up here, but what people are seeing is you being like,
Right, probably. Compounded by
sure
the
it's not
fact
that
that
bad.
like when you're facilitating, or at least no, let me rephrase that, when I'm facilitating, no matter how much prep work I do, anything not going exactly as I prepared for can be a little bit like derailing and unnerving. So
Sure.
we were talking about tools, right? Like I love the flexibility of pads of stickies and pens and a whiteboard. And oh, whoops,
Mhm.
we can erase that and we can move this here and we can stick this here and draw an arrow and add a sidebar note and whatever. I have used the tool that I used before, which is why I chose to use it. And then immediately when we started doing the sticky activity, I was like, okay, we'll group the stickies together that need to be grouped together. Could not figure out how to do it in the tool. It's like, great, now we've got 3 columns with like 20 plus stickies in them, and there is a bunch of overlap, and we can't even like
Can't
identify
group
the
them.
overlap. So then it's like,
Yeah.
oh boy, like we're already off the rails. So yeah.
Yeah. You said an interesting thing that I was kind of reflecting on from my retro that was a sprint retro, and it was this situation of being like, I want to interject to be able to get more conversation rolling. So even if there was discussion about like someone had a post-it note up, I guess on a DevOps board, it's just literally a like a square, an item, whatever. Someone has an item up on the retro board and it was like voted high so that we talk about it. But when we started to talk about it, people were like, well, wait, like, can we clarify what this actually means? Because I'm a little bit unsure about the details. So it was good because someone spoke up and they're like, I didn't put this up there, but this is my interpretation. So I'm like, awesome. Like, I get that it's not easy for people to just speak up all the time, but it was really cool to have people like start to get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was kind of like, okay, but where people are sharing their perspective, but I don't know if the person who put the thing up on the board was even present. So we had some people that were out for the retro, just unfortunate timing. So I was like, shit. I need to like chime in to say something to be like, because I actually think I know think I know who, and I think I know what the context was in particular, but I can't say for certain. So I wanted to chime in to be like, I believe it's this, but I wanted to be able to do so without making it sound like here's my opinion about how you need to look at this and how you need to go solve it. I just wanted to give enough information to be like, now you're unblocked, like please discuss. And it was really challenging because for a lot of the reasons you were just sharing, where I'm very nervous about saying the wrong thing, how people are going to interpret that. Like, the list goes on, and felt paralyzing.
It's also when you speak in a meeting like that, at least for like us and our roles, are people hearing you as the facilitator or the manager, right?
Right.
And like that can have different implications. Being like, as the facilitator, like, here's how I interpret this based on what I have heard from the room and kind of like coalesced around, versus, hi, I'm the manager and like this is the thing. And then people are like, I guess that's the thing because the manager said that's the thing. Like, you have to be careful the influence that what you say has. So makes it
Yeah,
even more
because
difficult.
I think we're on the same page, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our intentions in meetings like that, and probably other meetings as well, is like it's to clarify, not to like basically trample people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of challenging. But I'm doing a little bit of reflection, even from hearing some of your experiences on your side, going through like a a project retro, and I guess I want to maybe kind of start to summarize, and I have a question that I want to try answering, and I would be curious to hear your own answer. So
Uh-oh.
we have not rehearsed this, and this is I'm nervous. Like I want to ask you first so that I get some time. But I think let me share what I'm thinking. I'm curious if for next time, right? Do you have thoughts about how you might approach now that you've gone through this and what felt uncomfortable? Do you have thoughts about what you would tweak to at least see some improvement from yourself in how you facilitate next time?
I mean, like, this is fresh and raw. So I actually am working on collecting some feedback for myself about how people perceived that it went. Um, I mean, there's unfortunately some of the things I would do differently were a little bit out of my control. Um,
Okay,
so I find that one interesting because I'm not trying to lay any blame. But I think part of my struggle with this particular retro was that it didn't conform to the way I would normally set up a retro. So specifically, this project that we were retroing it ran for quite a long time.
hmm
Um, it ended up running over schedule. It also spanned before I joined the company into when I joined the company and into when I kind of took the reins of the team, so to speak. Um, and I wouldn't normally want a project to even last that long. And if a project was lasting that long, I think I would have probably broken down and retroed on milestones,
interesting.
right? So that you have time to apply the learnings from the milestone back into the same project.
Okay,
Unless it's a smaller project, and then like, great, well, retro, like I'm comfortable retroing an incident because they usually don't last more than a day unless like it's a bad time. I'm comfortable retroing a sprint because like I get 2 weeks of work I can get and I can understand. But when I try to get multiple stakeholders from multiple teams on a project that spanned a long time together, for me that's like there's too much. Like
right.
the project didn't fail, right? The project, things went out the door, problems were solved, that it did a thing. There are many
Sure.
things that could have been better. And I think for me, the struggle is because there were many things that could be better, the conversation in a retro that spans 3+ months and 3+ teams can go in so many different directions. And you're not trying to kind of coalesce around one why, right? Like an incident retro, it's like, let's get to the root cause of the incident, or root causes if there's a couple. Sprint retro, it's like, let's look back over the things that happened in this 2 week block and let's like talk about what went well and what didn't go well. As soon as we're like talking about months and multiple people's different perceptions across
Different
teams,
teams, right?
and
Yeah.
it felt rather nebulous. And trying to drive that back to like concrete actions is like, well, these particular team to team interactions weren't good, these particular team in team interactions weren't good. We could have improved this process. Early planning could have potentially been done differently. Check-ins could have been done differently. And I'm just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like,
You
how do
can't really
we?
get into the details of any of those with an audience like that without spending like a week
Yeah.
drilling into each one.
And I mean, I wonder if maybe there's some way to quickly agree on maybe what the top
Mm,
challenges were and kind of work to like, hey, instead of trying to like boil the ocean of this project, let's figure out some of the key elements that we want to discuss and then really like focus the discussion on that.
right.
Some
You
feedback I
could
did,
even do like, oh, go ahead.
or some feedback that I got that I really appreciate and take to heart was like, there was value in having multiple teams there because I think a bunch of us learned about some misalignments we didn't necessarily know existed.
Right.
Great. But then also, some members of the engineering team felt like, I really wish we could have, as an engineering team, debriefed how we did this project amongst ourselves. So like there was like a proposal, like, could we potentially do another retro in that kind of context? And I was like, hell yeah, like we can do whatever. Whatever.
Yeah.
And the other feedback was like, perhaps trying to squeeze a retro into an hour to retro like a 3-month project is like, it just might need more time.
Yeah.
And that's true. And I feel like trying to have a conversation that's heavy across like 3 hours remotely is a tall order. So again, trying to reflect on what I would do differently, and that feedback starts to give me ideas about what I would do differently next time.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, you say it's raw and fresh, but I still think that's like a really good start on some things, right? Just kind of organizing how some of that feels. And it sounds like you already have ideas. Maybe the actual implementation and stuff shapes up differently, but some ideas for what to focus on.
Yeah, well, that's because I didn't sleep last night thinking about it. The other fun
Awesome.
part
Yeah.
about having increased anxiety is that things stay with you and you have to rethink them many times. It's a whole lot of fun.
And just when you're about to fall asleep, your brain goes, "Hey, remember that thing that you were anxious about?"
Or that thing you said.
Yeah. Everyone thinks you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was doing, while you were talking, I was engaged, but I was trying to come up with my answer as well.
How dare you?
Thank you for buying me some time. I know, I think like I think that the team did very well for not having done a retro together before, and some people never having done a retro at all. So when I think about, there's a bunch of stuff I can improve, but I think one thing that comes to mind in particular is like a bunch of the retro itself in the beginning was spent explaining like, oh, here's how it's going to work. So I'm chewing up time, then I'm kind of rushing through things. So I started my improved retro plan by opening up the retro board the day after we did the retro. So they have a full month to go put things onto this retro board.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be more proactive the entire month, reminding people and making sure they have a heads up on like the voting. Like, you get 3 votes on the items that go on the board. And if people I want to also encourage people, like, if you don't want 3 votes and you want to do some other arbitrary number, let's propose it. But I want to get that stuff done and started actively through this sprint that we're starting now, so that when it comes time for the retro, I also want to make decisions about, like, if we change the votes, like, I'm not going to try and decide that during the meeting. I
wonder if we could have 5 points instead of 3.
Well, so I actually told people, like I said, by the way, like, if you have opinions about this and you don't know where else to like ask or whatever, I said, we have a retro board. So like, you can always use this as a ground for just being like, I don't know, like, I'm not enjoying this, or this is working really well. Cool. So I just want to be more proactive in some of that approach to make sure that I'm basically not hijacking the meeting to try and get clarification for people. Right. I want them to come into it being like, hell yeah, like, I know what's up and I got the stuff up on there I wanted to say, and like, I'm ready to like have a heated battle royale conversation.
Fights.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny that you say that. When I was at Circle, this is incident retros, and I'm just trying to figure out how to take some of the techniques that I learned there and apply them to other types of retros. We were kind of iterating on the process of how we do incident retros. Mm-hmm. And at one point, we moved our retro process entirely async, and then that didn't work for a variety of reasons. But what we did land on, which I actually really liked, and this is the part I would like to think about how to bring into other styles of retros, is like an incident report gets written after the incident by, whoever the owner is, the manager of the team who owns the incident, or the first responder, whoever it was.
The unlucky soul. Yep.
They fill out the template, right? And then they circulate it for additional details from people who have additional details and feedback. And once it was kind of like people were happy with the state of the report, then it was kind of circulated out as like, this is the report. 1, please familiarize yourself with it And two, please add any comments to the document, right, for us to like see and be able to discuss. And then we will go into a synchronous retro together, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
already comes in. We don't have to go through the timeline. We don't have to go through what happened, right? Everybody understands because you did your pre-work, right? And then here were the things that were identified or discussed on the document as potential root causes and potential action items to take from this. And let's use the entire time of the synchronous retro to talk about those. And
Right.
it worked so well, at least in my experience. And I've been thinking about like, what does that look like in like a project retro? Like, could we do something similar where we do like a project reflection asynchronously? People contribute, debate, and then we go, great, we've kind of got these like the areas that people chose to like pick on and discuss are probably the areas we need to discuss face to face. Now, do we set up a retro around that? I don't know, early thinking, but there's probably something there.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Our retros for incidents in the group that I'm in at Microsoft look very similar to what you described, and it's cool because when they're reviewed, there's all these teams, and when they're brought up there, it's really neat because, and I'm sure it's a ton of pressure. I've the first one I did, I was choking up. I couldn't even speak. It was terrifying,
Yeah, yeah.
and then I'm like, why am I even
Been there.
scared of this? But it's really weird when your voice just stops working. But it's cool because you have all these other teams and stuff with different perspectives where they were like, actually, like, yeah, we were impacted by that too. And like, it's great you wrote this, but like something that's missing from one of your repair items is like, we think X needs to be addressed. And it's like, oh, good point. We might have had 3 teams reviewing the actual, the root cause and the repair items, but it's just another opportunity for people to be like, awesome work, but like one other thing that we want addressed. But I like your idea about that asynchronous ability because I think that just thinking about a lot of the remote work we do, and I don't want everything to just be because of remote work, but I think that there's an opportunity where if we can basically make the meeting time more meaningful,
Mm-hmm.
more meetingful. I don't know. Pun
Meatful.
somewhere. Meatful, yeah.
Ooh.
I think that there's value in doing that, but you also need to find a balance where the asynchronous part, if possible, isn't like, yeah, we're doing it, but it feels terrible. So
Yeah.
I want to give that some thought, but I think that would be a good takeaway as well.
Right on. Well, there you have
Awesome.
it. Better retros.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the takeaway is we're both going to try and do better next time. Graeme, thanks for the chat and thanks for being vulnerable about something that you think that you didn't do well, because I think that takes some guts to be able to admit to, and it's cool that you have some reflection that you're going to try to improve upon. So thank you.
Yeah, well, same.
Awesome. Thanks for watching. Give the video a thumbs up. Leave us some comments for all the algorithms to make sure that we become the biggest podcast in the world, of the universe, and subscribe because you'll want to see more of this. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Right on. See ya.